I'm Ian, and I actually kind of liked Sonic the Hedgehog 4. Yeah, that's about what I expected.
The late 2000s were a weird time to be a Sonic fan, mainly due to the games not being very good, at least according to critics and general audiences. Regardless of what opinions fans may have towards these games now, the dark age of Sonic, whatever that's supposed to mean, left the series in a pretty messy state, especially in the eyes of critics. And while games like Unleashed came along to try and fix things, and were definitely seen as a step in the right direction by a lot of fans at the time, other fans weren't quite as impressed, and critics still thought Sonic fucking sucked.
I mean, yeah, the game still sold well, but Sega knew that this wasn't going to be sustainable, so they pulled together and collectively said, holy shit, we need to fix Sonic.
Now, if you follow Sonic-related gaming journalism, you know that everyone thinks that the root of all things bad in Sonic is 3D. And that's stupid. Sonic works great in 3D, but lots of people disagreed, and so Sega announced Project Needlemouse, a mysterious new 2D Sonic game developed by Dimps, best known for their works on the very well-received Sonic Advance and Sonic Rush games, all of which was cause for great excitement. Eventually, the title was revealed as Sonic the Hedgehog 4, an episodic sequel to the Genesis trilogy, with the first part slated for a 2010 release. Critics and general audiences mostly responded with a resounding,
"Oh, that's cool, I guess."
While Sonic fans were a little more like,
"Oh my god, his eyes are green?"
Yeah, fans were pretty pissed about seeing modern Sonic in a 2D game and like, wow, it's funny how times change. That wasn't the only thing concerning fans though. Ignoring general skepticism towards an episodic Sonic game, gameplay leaks and demos were not super encouraging to fans, with the physics looking floaty and some of the levels being gimmicky garbage. The outrage was large enough that Sega actually ended up delaying the game to address these issues, which didn't work. Everyone still hated it.
Except for me. And critics. Critics actually thought it was great. Between this and Sonic Colors, released about a month later, Sonic's reputation was more or less saved. For about 2 years, then it was completely fucked up again. But as of today, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 is officially 10 years old on mobile phones, not on consoles. It came out like a week later on consoles, but I don't care. We're gonna play it and see if I think it still holds up after 10 long years.
After some developer logos, including an admittedly cute throwback to the Sonic 2 Sega logo, we are greeted with a very classic-style title screen with our favorite blue bastard doing the classic Sonic finger waggle.
Now, you know this is a real upgrade because instead of 2 frames of animation, he's got like 4.
Seriously though, this looks absolutely awful. It's the first thing you see when you start up the game. The least they could do is make sure it's fluidly animated and doesn't look like Sonic's fucking wrist is broken. At least it isn't off-center like the Sonic 1 version, that's a plus I guess. Upon pressing start, we get straight into the first level and, this looks pretty familiar. But make no mistake, this is not Green Hill Zone, it's Splash Hill Zone.
See, the difference between Green Hill and Splash Hill is that they're the exact same thing.
Yeah, so in a fairly odd decision considering it's supposed to be a sequel, this game relies exclusively on reused level tropes from Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. While I'm certainly not a fan of this, I don't find it as egregious as many probably do, simply because at this point in the series it wasn't yet a trend. Although I do find it weird, since Sonic Generations came out almost exactly 1 year later and did basically the exact same thing. Hell, Dimps even did the 3DS version of Generations, so they were definitely aware that it was in development, and yet they still did basically the same thing anyway.
But whatever, like I said earlier, the Sonic franchise at this point wasn't yet squirming in its own creative bankruptcy, so reusing level tropes for the sake of nostalgia, while definitely a little on the lazy side, wasn't as much of a problem as it would later become.
Now, aside from the familiarity of the visual design, there are a few things that you might notice upon first beginning this level, but the one that sticks out to most fans is the way that Sonic controls and interacts with the environment. Generally, Sonic fans react more or less like this.
Dear God, the sacrilege! It burns the very flesh of my hands like a plague brought forth from the fires of hell!
And honestly, they aren't even wrong. Sonic feels pretty fucking weird here. He's very responsive to inputs, has a satisfying, if floaty jump arc, and can get some pretty satisfying speed going here, but oh man, is it stiff and sluggish. Sonic on the Genesis is known for having incredibly fluid controls that, while occasionally a little bit janky, manage to maintain a sense of absolute control over Sonic while still realistically having to occasionally surrender to the laws of physics. There's a level of skill mastery to Sonic's movement in those games that, while not at all needed to beat the games, makes replaying them with an understanding of Sonic's control and the level design an absolute delight. Here he can literally just walk up walls and not give a shit.
An object in motion stays in motion? Well, I'm Sonic the Hedgehog 4, and I say fuck you, Isaac Newton!
There is momentum at play here, don't get me wrong, but it is entirely player controlled. You do gain and maintain speed in a natural way, but only if you continue to hold the direction in which that velocity is being built up. The famous example of how this doesn't work the same as in the classics is in the second zone, Casino Street. You have this little U-bend here, which is a reference to a few classic Sonic stages where you have to roll to continue to build up momentum to escape, but it just doesn't work like that here. You gotta Spider-Man that shit instead, and why include a segment of level that directly highlights the inferior physics like this? I always see people say that these changes are due to the use of the Sonic Rush engine, and while I don't think they're wrong, there's more to it than that, because Sonic Rush actually feels a bit closer to the Genesis games. You can gain speed on slopes, and the jump is a lot less stiff, though still not as graceful as in the Genesis games or even the advanced games. Regardless, it's still noticeably better than in Sonic 4, which means this control style was an intentional choice, and I have no idea why they did it. It is very odd.
Don't get me wrong though, I wouldn't describe Sonic's control here as awful. I wouldn't even necessarily describe it as bad at all. It's just not as fun as what was in the games that came before, which for a sequel is, not ideal.
You'll get used to it though, and like I said, Sonic is still perfectly responsive, if a little sluggish to start moving, which does admittedly make some of the platforming feel a little awkward, but other than that and the obvious physics issues, everything works as you'd expect. Sonic still got the spin dash, which feels really nice to use, and now he's even got the homing attack, which is kind of redundant. That thing literally exists because landing precisely on an enemy at high speed in 3D is too hard, so putting it back in 2D is kind of missing the point. But hey, it actually works really well. The reticle can be a touch on the picky side sometimes, but when the lock-on works as you'd expect, which it does the vast majority of the time, it's a very snappy and satisfying way to dispatch enemies, and I kinda like how it halts your momentum completely while just jumping into enemies preserves it. It gives you some options regarding your mobility through the air, and I actually really enjoy that. And the air dash you get when there's no target to lock onto is a great way of quickly gaining speed, which somewhat circumvents the sluggish starting speed he has. So while Sonic might not be the best thing in the world to control here, he is definitely functional, much more so than a lot of people give credit for.
And you know what? I'd say for the most part, this level design accommodates these controls reasonably well. This is kinda decent.
Don't get me wrong, these aren't the most thrilling levels on Earth or anything, but they're mostly perfectly serviceable. There's a lot of branching paths here, much like in Sonic 2 and 3, and in particular, the focus on relatively linear speedy paths through the stages is very Sonic 2, and the mix of speed and platforming is generally really well balanced, with neither really feeling like it totally overpowers the other. The platforming in particular is generally really well done, with platforms being spaced out in a way that very clearly accommodates Sonic's stiffer jump. Some of the best platforming in this game would have been completely and insanely frustrating with the controls of the Genesis games, but the level designers clearly understood what they were working with here, and made set pieces that feel genuinely pretty good to maneuver with this stiffer version of Sonic. The only problem I have with this is that it means things can get pretty samey. Aside from a change in the aesthetics, the platforming from zone to zone doesn't really feel any different, since there's only so much you can do with a Sonic that handles this way. That's doubly true for the more speedy sections. Since there's absolutely no skill required to move Sonic around thanks to the overly simplified physics, these sections basically always play out exactly the same. Hold right and sometimes jump. You don't even need to jump on springs anymore since they activate upon any contact like in the 3D games. Occasionally you might find a slope that's just a bit too large to Spider Sonic your way up, but when that happens there's almost always a speed booster there to ensure you can make it. Watching Sonic go fast is inherently pretty fun, so it's not the worst thing on Earth, but this lack of player involvement is legitimately disheartening.
Weirdly enough, the saving grace for this game's variety ends up coming from the level gimmicks that break away from the traditional Sonic gameplay, which isn't something I would normally say about a game in this franchise.
See, the game is structured almost like Sonic Mania, where Act 1 is a pretty accurate representation of the original level that the zone in question is inspired by, while the later acts put a different spin on things, and honestly, some of these gimmicks are a lot of fun. Splash Hill Zone Act 2 has these swinging vines, which actually don't work very well at all with Sonic's physics, but the ziplines in Act 3 are a ton of fun. The cannons in Casino Street Act 3 are amusing as well, and the crushing wall segment of Mad Gear Zone Act 3 is really tense and exciting, except for this part where the wall slows down to make sure you have enough time to get through the slow platforms without getting hurt.
Thank you! How considerate! What a nice death trap!
Casino Street Zone Act 2 is probably one of the most underrated levels in all of 2D Sonic, and that is a hill I am absolutely willing to die on. It's a casino stage that actually utilizes playing cards instead of just being pinball and slot machine based, and that is incredibly cool. It's done really well too, with Sonic building a hand as he runs past these card panels, and getting 3 of a kind in your hand will earn you rings or extra lives or whatever. Plus there are these card platforms that flip and almost act like the disappearing blocks in Mega Man, though not nearly as strict with the timing. There's some pretty solid and memorable platforming in this stage, all of which works really well with this stiffer version of Sonic. I love this level. Lost Labyrinth Act 2 is a really neat level as well, if a sort of irritating one. Everything is shrouded in darkness, and the only light comes from Sonic's torch, as well as any other torches that he lights with it. There are explosives you can light and some pretty neat timing puzzles that I'm too stupid to solve, but like, this is the sort of thing I would want to see in Sonic 4. Gimmicks that are impossible on the Genesis, but still fit in with the vibe of the classics. I like this, except I don't. The torch is actually really sort of annoying, but the idea is still pretty cool. Plus, if you have the Chaos Emeralds by this point, you can just use Supersonic and light everything up that way and cheese it.
So yeah, some of these level gimmicks are legitimately really fun. Not fun enough, however, to completely negate the fact that these zones go on for a bit too long.
3 acts per zone, plus a separate boss. That is quite a lot. We aren't quite in 5 acts Knuckles Chaotix territory here, but these zones feel like they last an eternity regardless. The level gimmicks aren't enough to keep things from getting stale after a while, since the core design of these stages still remains very samey underneath that, and with so few changes in scenery, that becomes extra apparent.
Yeah, like I said, the level tropes are all taken from previous games, but there's also only 4 of them, which I know this is only half of the Sonic 4 experience, but still, that is not a lot of variety. Now, the stage themes being reused is one thing, but the bosses are also taken from the classics, except they're somehow even easier.
The homing attack breaks these fights in half, since they're all about just hitting Eggman when he's nearby. At least the desperation attacks he has are pretty fun. When you hit Eggman a few times, he switches up his tactics and uses new attacks, and these are generally designed around trying to time a homing attack in between his attacks, and it's quite a lot of fun to hit him during these, even if they are still super easy. These are some decent twists on these otherwise very unoriginal boss fights. Not decent enough that they justify a boss rush as the final level, but hey, at least you get to listen to a very repetitive and annoying boss theme the entire fucking time.
Also, the final boss fight is just Death Egg Robot. Like, it's not even different until you get to his pinch mode, which actually kind of rules.
He's invulnerable, and you have to knock these rocket fists back at him to open him up to attack. This gets pretty fucking hectic with him leaping all over the place, and honestly, I think this is a legitimately great final boss fight when it's doing its own thing like this. That kind of applies to all of these fights, actually, and speaking of not doing its own thing, check out these special stages. They're accessed like in Sonic 1, getting 50 rings and jumping into the big ring after the goalpost, and the stages themselves are also based on Sonic 1's.
I've got my barf bag ready. Come at me, motherfucker.
I actually don't mind these. I'm not a fan of the majority of special stages, but honestly, I think these are totally manageable. You rotate the maze around Sonic rather than controlling him directly through it, which does make the jump button completely fucking worthless, but I kinda dig how these end up playing out, since the challenge comes more from finding enough rings to progress under a time limit rather than the bullshit goal signs, although that is still definitely a thing. These are probably among the easiest special stages in the entire franchise, since you can just pause and hit reset if you fuck up, so like, there's not much of an excuse to not go for the emeralds in this game.
And honestly, it's definitely worth it, because Supersonic absolutely kicks ass in this game.
Like you'd expect, he's rocking extra speed and an enhanced jump, but thanks to the super stiff physics of this game, you always have absolute control over him rather than having him slip all over the place like in Sonic 2. The somewhat stale level design also benefits Supersonic kinda heavily, since just holding right and plowing through everything in your path is crazy satisfying. Honestly, this might be one of my favorite implementations of Supersonic in the entire series. The GIMP physics system really does his controllability a world of good.
Kinda lame that getting the emeralds doesn't automatically grant you the best ending, though.
To do that, you also have to get all these rings in this little auto-running section, which I failed to do, so Sonic just stares at me looking super annoyed like, geez man, I'm sorry. At least getting all the emeralds does grant you a cliffhanger, in the form of a PNG of Metal Sonic.
Damn, guys, really pushing the graphics engine with that one.
Speaking of the graphics, they're weird. I mean, I wouldn't say the game is ugly at all. In fact, I actually think it looks pretty nice, at least for what it is. The environments are all very detailed, and the backgrounds are generally kinda stunning, while the character models are definitely up to snuff for 2010, no complaints there. It's just, why is everything so fucking flat looking? There's no attempt made here to portray any depth, which is really weird since the Genesis Sonic games were absolutely trying to create the illusion of 3D space in their levels. Just compare Green Hill Zone to Splash Hill Zone. Green Hill looks way more 3D, and that's just very odd. Again, Sonic 4 doesn't look bad for what it's going for, but what it's going for is just really weird and leaves everything looking like plastic. Also, why is this game so fucking shiny? The characters, the enemies, even the springs have a weird bloom effect in some levels. I think the effect looks alright on the Badniks since they're robots, but Sonic's out here putting Heroes and Adventure DX to shame, and like, poor Robotnik, Eggman looks utterly fucking disgusting in this game.
At least if you're playing the 360 version. For some reason, depending on what console you play on, the lighting effects are different.
That glossy look is a bit less noticeable in the Wii version, for example, and it generally looks much better as a result, other than the sub-HD resolution. Weirdly enough, that actually isn't the only change in the Wii version's presentation. The music is also different, since WiiWare titles had a pretty tight file size limit, so rather than the pre-recorded audio files other versions use, the Wii port instead sequences the music on the fly, and as a result, it actually sounds a little bit closer to the Genesis games at times, even though the compositions themselves are the same across all versions. It's pretty neat, and sometimes sounds a little bit better than the HD versions, which use some really weird instruments that I guess are trying to capture the sound of the old Genesis tracks, but not super successfully. Like, the percussion sounds alright, but the actual melodies are all really weird sounding. They're composed well enough, though. It isn't one of the best soundtracks in the series, but I wouldn't say it's bad either, just sort of unremarkable for Sonic, other than the weird instrumentation and a few of the tracks that actually do stick out for being pretty good, particularly with the Wii instruments. The Wii version also allows multiple save files, which isn't a thing on the Xbox 360 for some fucking reason.
But regardless of which version of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 you choose to play, is the game worth your time? I don't fucking know, man. Like, the game is incredibly uninspired and shallow, and in a lot of ways just a complete step down from the games that it is trying to follow up, but I kinda like it anyway?
It's not on par with any of the Genesis Sonic games, and as a sequel, I think it fails to hit the mark, but as a standalone 2D platformer in the Sonic series, I still find myself having fun with it. It's a very shallow kind of fun, granted, but just casually blasting through this game can be a perfectly amusing way to kill an hour of your time, especially if you've unlocked Super Sonic. I completely understand its negative reputation among fans as a sequel, but for what it is, I still think it's pretty fun, and with Sonic Mania existing now and doing a much better job at revitalizing the classic Sonic gameplay, going back to this as a weird piece of Sonic's history was a fairly fun, if ultimately unimpressive time.
So it more or less completely fails as a sequel, but is still a pretty passable 2D platformer. Yeah, that sounds about right. At least to me. What do you think of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1? You probably hate it. Tell me why in the comments down below. I will be covering Episode 2 at some point in the future, so stay tuned for that, and be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more from me. Until next time, guys, I'm LyingTuna, signing out. Bye.